seriously, it's just so neat to be a part of this. It's so wonderful to see folks in person convening again for this media day. There is a ton of juice in this room. There is wind in our sails, and so much of that has to do with just being able to be in the same flippin' room together. So yeah, thanks for being here, everybody. All right. George, hot seat time, Buster. Yeah, no. Okay, so let's talk about the previous role that you come from with MGM Entertainment in Las Vegas. With that role, you have some history with women's basketball, with the tournament, with women's basketball proper, whether it's collegiate or WNBA. Tell us about the relationship with the sport now that you're the commissioner of our wonderful conference.
Absolutely. Well, it starts when I was at Virginia a long time ago in the early 90s. And I happened to be at Virginia when Dawn Staley was there and the Burge twins, and it was one of those great times to be a fan of women's college basketball. And you know, I learned quickly that anyone who's not a fan of women's college basketball hasn't seen the game yet. It's fantastic. I was very fortunate, as you mentioned, in my last role at MGM Resorts, where I was running entertainment and sports, to also oversee the Las Vegas Aces, the WNBA franchise, and to kind of nurture that franchise as we were building it, and also to sit on the WNBA Board of Governors, and particularly proud of the fact that I sat on the Board of Governors during the summer in which we redid the collective bargaining agreement and really, I think for the first time, did the right things for the female athletes in the WNBA. I was also part of the group that helped to expand the basketball tournament in Las Vegas, and to bring the women there, and then to move them to the Mandalay Bay Event Center and elevate what we do for women's basketball. I'm a deep, passionate fan of women's basketball, and anything I can do from my current seat to help the sport, I'll be doing.
Now we're talking. I love that. Thank you. Next question for both Teresa and George. You know, Teresa talked about it. You talked about it. The video talked about us coming off this historic season in Pac-12 women's basketball, that classic of a championship game, Stanford and Arizona. You know, sometimes we refer to our conference as the conference on the rise, but man, I don't know. I mean, rise, we have set the bar. We have set the standard for years now. You mentioned the numbers, Teresa, just crazy. With that in mind, with those numbers in mind, with our history, our legacy, our serious momentum, Teresa, we'll start with you. Let's just put you on the hot seat in terms of expectations for this coming season with all the returners, all the great coaches, and that history behind us.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the expectations continue to rise, right? That's why we are the Conference of Champions, is the expectation is to continue to compete at the highest level for national championships, to make sure that we're graduating our student athletes, that our student athletes are having a great experience on our campuses, and that we're doing everything we can to support them to be their brightest and best. So I think the expectations continue to be national contenders, right? Like, our goal as a league will always be to put the most number of teams into the NCAA tournament and to get the most favorable seeds we possibly can. So I think the expectations that we all collectively have, the coaches, the student athletes, the administrations, is to compete for national championships. And I think it is our responsibility to our student athletes to provide them with support they need to be in a position to do that.
You're up.
Yeah, my expectation is to win another women's national basketball championship.
Plain and simple?
Plain and simple.
Give it up. All right. Both you. Which team? Oh, Cindy Brunson. Which team? That's cold. Anybody have a prediction?
I love all my children equally.
Oh, brilliant. Teresa, prediction?
My prediction is that all 12 are going to be in a position to win this year, Ann.
You had that coming, Cindy.
I know.
You had that coming. I got you.
Cindy's always going to keep us on our toes.
All right, let's talk about the alliance with the ACC and Big Ten. A lot of folks, for good reason, really excited about that recently announced alliance. George, you first. We'll What are the goals of the Alliance, and how do you see it impacting our conference in women's basketball?
Let me give you the background first.
Please.
We went through a process when Texas and Oklahoma news leaked that they were leaving the Big 12 and going to the SEC. It caused us to go through a process to decide whether or not we wanted to expand the Pac-12. Our presidents and chancellors voted unanimously to not expand, but when you started to think about the reasons why you might want to expand, adding new media markets, adding additional teams, creating new rivalries, having us play on the East Coast sometimes, that started a conversation about, is there a way to achieve that without actually expanding? And that's where the Alliance was born out of. And what I would say about the Alliance is there's 3 goals of the Alliance with the ACC and the Big Ten. The first is to work together among just the 3 conferences and also the 41 institutions that make up those 3 conferences to continue to be in the leadership position with what we do for student athletes. So we're going to take kind of our best practices, the best practices from the ACC and the Big Ten for mental and physical health, for leadership training, for career development, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and share that among the 3 conferences and elevate all of our work there. The second is collegiate athletics is in the middle of a tumultuous summer and has a lot of issues facing it. The fallout from the Alston case, NCAA governance structure going forward, NIL, all of these. We've committed to work together across the 3 conferences to not vote together, because we may disagree and we may end up voting differently, but to at least have discussions about what's in the best interest of the long-term collegiate model as we think through each of those issues. And the third piece, and the one that probably gets the most attention, is scheduling. And that includes football and women's and men's basketball and all of our other sports. And it's twofold. It's one, playing more intersectional games against those other conferences, and then thinking about ways to create additional events that collectively we can own that will elevate the game. So one of the things we're thinking about for basketball, both women's and men's, is whether or not a mid-season tournament makes sense. And we'll take input from the coaches and the athletic departments from all leagues and make a decision about that. But it certainly is going to be exciting, because at a minimum it means more games against the ACC and the Big Ten, both home and away.
That's really, I love the idea of that tournament. Ooh, we're gonna ask you to keep us posted on that. Teresa, same question about the Alliance. Obviously, you've got this lens into what we do, how we do it on the women's basketball side. Your take?
Yeah, I would say first, just to echo some of George's comments, one of the really exciting pieces of the partnership is 41 really philosophically aligned institutions. And I would say that alignment is consistent with our women's basketball leaders across those 41 programs. Like, we have deep friendships and relationships across these 3 leagues, and the coaches have already really started ideating about the opportunity that the Alliance creates, not only to play against each other and compete against each other, but to really elevate the brand of the game and to grow the game in our communities. So we're certainly talking about, and the coaches are really ideating about what it could mean from a scheduling perspective in terms of matchups that will be appealing nationally and will also create local interest. But as I mentioned in my comments, our coaches are also equally as interested in the off-the-court opportunities, right? And they've already started talking about the 50-year anniversary of Title IX coming up, and how our legendary coaches across all 3 leagues could collaborate on really amplifying that and creating some grassroots opportunities around that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. Our coaches are very engaged in it, and we're looking forward to using it to enhance the experience of all of our student athletes and really use our platform to grow the game.
Kind of dovetailing with the next question for you, Teresa, in terms of growing the game on the court, off the court. We've seen the Pac-12 men's side announce the scheduling and educational alliance and relationship with the SWAC. Okay, so might we expect that same kind of relationship on the women's side? And why is that so critical for Pac-12 women's basketball and beyond?
Yeah, and I'm glad, and I appreciate you asking about that. And I know Jamie Zaninovich is here today, and he will be talking a little bit about it tomorrow on the men's side. And certainly he and our team have done a lot of work to make this possible. And we are so looking forward to this partnership, because it really speaks to some of the core values of our women's basketball student athletes, which are really taking on issues around social justice and really looking at the opportunity from a cultural enrichment perspective. And the way our coaches and student athletes are talking about it on the women's side is really to make it a mutually beneficial partnership for our coaches, for our student athletes, for our administrators, for our campus leaders, to make sure that it's much deeper than just going and playing some games.
Yeah.
Right. We really do want to educate on the history of HBCUs in this country, and making sure that those HBCU student athletes have an opportunity to experience campus life on our campuses, and that our student athletes have that opportunity on those campuses, and that everyone comes out of it with a sense of enlightenment and awareness that maybe didn't exist before we created this opportunity for them.
I got to think that will be as impactful as you can get for everyone involved. And I love that. And let's hope that that happens on the women's side, too. Okay, George, you're up. I know you've been barnstorming all the Pac-12 campuses, near and far. You've hit them all. I imagine that the listening tour has been enlightening, and then some. When it comes to our sport, if you've got some learnings or takeaways, could you share those with us?
Yeah, two immediately jump to mind, and neither of them I think are going to be surprising. One is I've visited all 12 schools in my first 100 days, finishing with Arizona State last Friday.
Okay.
And there's great pride among all of our schools about being part of the Pac-12. And I think I knew to expect that, but to see it in action was really enlightening and filled my heart. The other piece that I think is kind of obvious, but until you experience it, you don't quite know what it'll feel like, is I got a chance on each of the stops to meet with different teams during their practices, but then also with the student-athlete leadership teams in most places to have a meal, sit down, have a couple of hours to talk to the student-athletes. And these are some of the most impressive human beings you can imagine. It was overwhelming. You sit in the room and you look around trying to figure out which of these folks you're going to end up working for. I mean, they were very, very special.
Were you expecting that, or was that kind of a pleasant, whoa, are you kidding me gift?
I think my expectations were here, and they were exceeded. Yeah.
That's special. Okay. Next question for both of you. Gender equity. We've mentioned it. We've talked about it. We've recognized it. We acknowledge it. We promote it. Was front and center at both the men's and women's tournaments, obviously, in their respective cities last year. The NCAA has issued a recent report on some of its findings regarding what is going on and how we need to improve. Teresa, let's start with you. Let's talk about some of the steps the Pac-12 takes to ensure gender equity for women's basketball and, frankly, for all sports, because I know it's been front and center.
Yeah, I would say, Ann, first and foremost, as it relates to the NCAA and the national conversation, we're really proud of the fact that started with one of our student athletes and one of our coaches, right? And I think that is so indicative of what we foster on our campuses in terms of using your voice to speak up when something doesn't feel right. So we're proud of that. And we have been national advocates to participate in this NCAA conversation, right? Corey Close has been very active as a member of the Women's Basketball Oversight Committee, as the president of the WBCA. Lisa Peterson from the University of Oregon, who's here today, meeting individually with every head coach to talk about these very issues. And George and I have talked to our presidents and chancellors about the importance of us taking this opportunity in this window to move forward meaningful change, right? All of those recommendations coming out of that report will require, in the governance structure, support, right? And we are having those conversations with our campus leaders and are prepared to advocate for them along the way.
George, I'd love to put the same question to you.
Yeah, I read the gender equity report that came out last month from the NCAA. I think with maybe one exception, we agree wholeheartedly with every one of the recommendations. We love the fact that March Madness now applies to both the women and the men. We really like the idea of there being a structure within the NCAA so that the two groups that are working on the men's and the women's tournament are sitting together, not apart. We like the idea of separating out and selling separately and not bundling with all of the other sports, women's basketball, because I think women's basketball is maybe the biggest growth sport in collegiate athletics right now and deserves that prominence. The one area where I need more information before we're going to come to a conclusion as a conference about whether or not we support it is whether or not to co-locate the men's and women's Final Four. My gut tells me that may actually be doing a disservice to the women, not a service, but I don't know enough to make that conclusion. So we're doing all of the work necessary, not just within our conference, but with the folks who know the most about women's college basketball around the country to get input to be able to thoughtfully take a position for the conference on that particular. But the whole gender equity review and almost all of the recommendations we're 100% behind.
You know, I would love to blow our own horn in terms of the DEI efforts and the gender equity efforts, and a huge thank you to you two, your colleagues, folks that work with and for you, to making sure that is as big a presence as any win or loss or Final Four appearance or what have you. That's the stuff that really, really, when it comes down to it, matters so, so deeply to each and every student athlete. So thank you for that. John, I think you're up. My time is up. And John, you've got Q&A time, right, with the media members? All right. I'll abdicate the throne here. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ann.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
We'll open up the floor to you all for questions. Dina, right here, we'll pass the mic around. And just a reminder, please state your name and affiliation before asking George and Teresa your question. Thanks.
Hi, good morning. Michelle Smith, Pac12.com, longtime cover of Pac-12 women's basketball. I want to follow up quickly on the question about the NCAA and the co-location of the tournament possibly. George, I will say that I've asked your predecessor every year for multiple years in a row about the Pac-12 getting a women's Final Four back, assisting in getting a women's Final Four back toward the West Coast. Obviously, Phoenix is now in the mix. And so I guess I want to explore the impact of the conference's ability to influence and get those West Coast Final Fours that have been lacking for almost 20 years in a scenario where we're talking about co-location.
Yeah, given our success in women's basketball, I can't imagine it doesn't come back to the West Coast. I was part of the group in Las Vegas when Nevada, for the first time a couple of years back, was allowed to bid on tournaments and other NCAA championships, and we put in bids as well, and we have to bring it to the West Coast.
When you look at, I want to go back to the alliance real quickly with the Big Ten and ACC. Is that something that we can, as in women's basketball, in these circles, if you will, is that something we can anticipate in terms of games happening in the near future with those two conferences?
Yeah, I think as soon as there are openings available on the calendar and we start scheduling non-conference games that are available on the calendar, we will look to add alliance games. I think, in football, we're scheduled 10, 12 years out, and there are other issues, but fortunately in basketball, we don't have those issues to the same extent.
This one is for both of you, Anne Marie Anderson, Pac-12 Networks. In the past, we've had some really high-profile players in the league that has been one or two athletes promoted throughout the season. I'm wondering what the conference can do to create those stars, the buzz around those stars, and maybe have it be a little more widespread than just one or two players.
First of all, hi, Anne Marie. It's nice to see you in person. And I appreciate that comment or that question. And certainly our role here at the Pac-12, and that's the Pac-12 Conference, the Pac-12 Networks, and all the platforms we have available to us, is to be great storytellers, right? And I think you're accurate in saying that we have a lot of amazing student athletes, not only for what their performances are on the court, but all of their leadership off the court. And so certainly, whether it's our marketing and strategic communication staff on the conference side or the folks on the network side, we absolutely are committed to making sure that we tell all of those stories. Certainly there is always national interest and national buzz around the most high-profile student athletes, and that benefits our conference as it relates to national awards and all of those things. But we absolutely do have a commitment to making sure that all of those stories get told with the platforms we have available to us at the conference.
Although I've lost my mic, I did want to follow up with that. Does NIL change at all the way that you guys will be able to promote athletes? If anybody didn't hear me, does NIL change at all the way, in a positive or a negative way?
Sure. I think NIL is a huge opportunity for the conference. Starting July 1st, all of our student athletes for the first time in history could take advantage of their brand, get paid without losing their eligibility, and that's something the conference is in favor of and will do everything we can to support. I'll give you one example. Because we own all of our media rights, which sets us apart from a lot of other conferences, we ended up announcing that we will create for free for any student athlete a highlight package of their their games, and they can use that, put on social media, and elevate their brand profile on their social media platforms. Then if they have a NIL deal with an approved company, that company can come and license the highlight package from us at a fair kind of market rate and use that to promote their product and service. And I think that's unique to our conference. I haven't seen any other conference do that. So what we can do at the conference level, we'll do to support NIL. I think NIL should be a competitive advantage because in our Mountain and Pacific time zones, we don't have other Power 5 schools. And we also have 5 of the top 20 DMAs in the country. And we should be leaning into that and helping our student athletes, and we're going to do everything we can.
Hi, Cheryl Coward, hoopfeed.com. With the HBCU partnership, something I'm really excited about because most of my family went to HBCUs on the East Coast and in the Southeast. And most of those schools are actually older than most Pac-12 schools. So has there been any talk to expand that in the coming years to maybe make it an ongoing series and, just kind of make it like a historical thing that goes on?
Well, first of all, thank you for your interest, right, in asking that question. So right now, the partnership extends for 4 years, but I will tell you, we already have member institutions that currently have HBCUs on their schedules, independent of this partnership with the SWAC. So I certainly think that right now we've committed to a 4-year period of time, but our coaches and our student athletes are so excited about it and are really looking forward to the opportunity that it presents. So I could easily see it extending on beyond that, given the interest and the commitment that's behind it.
Super excited for another all Pac-12 final in Minneapolis, but looking ahead to 2023, has the Pac-12 been involved in any conversations about potentially removing the 2023 site from Dallas in light of the restrictive reproductive rights legislation in place in Texas?
There's been no conversation about that yet.
Follow-up question, Cindy Brunson, Pac-12 Network. Any consideration given to bringing the Pac-12 women's tournament back to Seattle now that Climate Change Arena is up and running?
I think the great news about all of our tournaments is we have multiple cities that want to host them. They're great events. They bring in lots of people. They elevate, the city's economic fortunes. And we have a period of time left on our contracts in Las Vegas. I was sitting on the other side of the table when we negotiated those contracts. When those contracts come up for rebid, I'm sure we're going to have multiple bidders to host our tournaments.
George, a quick question for you. I know your hair's on fire visiting all the campuses and trying to and getting up to speed with a million different sports across the landscape. But when it comes to women's basketball, what struck you most quickly in terms of getting to know this sport, the coaches, that landscape, and the history of women's basketball? What struck you?
Well, the quality of the coaching in our league is unparalleled anywhere in the country, and I'm extremely proud of that. I guess the other thing that struck me when I was on my listening tour was I got tours of all of the facilities, and the amount that each of our schools has invested in women's and men's basketball equally, practice facilities and other facilities, has been surprising to me. I guess I didn't anticipate that level of investment in the sport, and you see that paying dividends.
Are there any other questions? We have time for maybe one or two more before Colorado comes in. No, going once, going twice. Great. George, Teresa, thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for being here. Appreciate it.